In the stillness of the night, a baby's heart stopped, suddenly, terrifyingly, sending shockwaves through the NICU. Doctors scrambled, alarms blaring in every direction, but despite their frantic efforts, nothing seemed to revive her. Just as the team began to lose their grip on hope, an unexpected figure entered the scene. A golden retriever. With quiet determination, the dog walked into the room, moving with a sense of purpose. In a world of science and technology, this dog was about to defy every law they held true. It was just another quiet evening at St. Adrienne's Hospital, where nurses and doctors carried out their routines as patients lay in their beds, monitored by machines. Yet amidst the calm, something unusual began to unfold. A golden retriever named Charlie made his way through the automatic doors, unnoticed by the busy staff. His fur shone like gold beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, and his soft brown eyes were focused, unwavering. No one seemed to question his presence, perhaps assuming he was a therapy dog or a stray who wandered too far from home. But Charlie wasn't lost. His steps were deliberate, as though he knew exactly where he was headed. His paws clicked softly on the floor as he moved with purpose. A nurse, tired and ready for the end of her shift, spotted him but simply sighed and let him pass. Charlie didn't hesitate. His path was clear, leading him straight to the neonatal intensive care unit, where fragile lives clung to their machines, fighting for every breath. Inside one of the glass-enclosed incubators, a baby lay still and fragile, tubes and wires wrapped around her tiny body, tethering her to the machines that were keeping her alive. Charlie stopped in front of the window, his gaze softening as he watched her. With a gentle nudge of his nose, he pushed open the door and slipped inside, unnoticed. With a quiet grace, Charlie positioned himself by the baby's crib, curling up as close as the medical equipment allowed. And then, something extraordinary happened. The beep of the heart monitor, once sharp and irregular, softened, just slightly, but it was enough to catch anyone's attention. It was an unspoken mystery. Why had Charlie come? How did he know to be there? And why did his presence seem to calm the baby? The hours passed, and the nurses continued their rounds, oblivious to the quiet connection forming in the ICU. The baby's heart rate, once chaotic, found a steady rhythm. The machines beeped in harmony, signaling a gradual but noticeable improvement. Outside the ICU, Nurse Grace let out a deep sigh, rubbing her tired eyes. It had been an exhausting shift. Emotionally and physically drained, she had spent months watching over this fragile infant, helpless as the baby's condition swung between moments of promise and despair. But tonight felt different. The air around her seemed lighter, more hopeful. As she leaned against the nurse's station, a thought tugged at the back of her mind. Something was off. She straightened up and decided to check on the baby one last time before the end of her shift. Entering the ICU, her eyes immediately fell on a golden figure beside the crib. She blinked, startled. There, lying next to the baby, was Charlie, the same retriever she'd spotted earlier. For a moment, she considered shooing him away, calling security to remove him from the sterile space. But something stopped her. The baby's vital signs were steady, a first in days. And suddenly it clicked. Was this just a coincidence? Or was this dog, somehow, playing a part in the baby's recovery? A distant memory resurfaced in Grace's mind. Her own child, now a teenager, who had once fought for his life in the ICU. Back then, she would have held onto any thread of hope, no matter how faint. Even the quiet presence of a dog had been something to cling to. Shaking herself out of the reverie, she cautiously moved toward the crib. Charlie lifted his head as she approached, his gaze calm and watchful. He wasn't causing harm. In fact, the baby appeared more peaceful than she had in days. A wave of emotion hit Grace. Hope, disbelief, and an unfamiliar sense of wonder. She knelt beside the crib and gently reached out, brushing her fingers against the baby's tiny hand. The baby's fingers twitched under her touch. Grace's breath caught in her throat. This was no ordinary dog. And tonight was no ordinary night. Without knowing why, Grace decided to let Charlie stay. His presence felt right, like he belonged there in that very moment. She stood up, glancing at the heart monitor. Its rhythm was steady now, reassuring. Whatever was happening, it was beyond her understanding, but it was happening. As the night wore on, Grace remained close, her gaze flickering between the sleeping dog and the fragile infant. She couldn't explain the connection between them, but for the first time in weeks, a spark of hope began to burn inside her. Something was unfolding here, something beyond her understanding. The way Charlie had appeared at the hospital, unseen by the staff, slipping into the ICU as if he belonged, was too strange to ignore. Grace leaned against the window, staring out at the city lights below, her thoughts racing between logic and instinct. She looked back at the baby, whose condition had once seemed so fragile. How many times had she stood helpless, watching the machines do all they could to keep the baby alive? Tonight, though, something was different. Could it be the dog's presence? Was it even possible that a dog could make such a difference? Her mind drifted to her own past, memories of a time long buried. Years ago, she had sat in the same place, watching over her son as he lay in a hospital bed, fighting for his life after a severe asthma attack. The fear and helplessness had been overwhelming. She had prayed for any kind of miracle. Her son had pulled through, but those memories had left scars that never quite healed. Grace glanced at Charlie, who was now resting his head on his paws, his eyes occasionally flicking open to check on the baby. His calm demeanor was almost unreal. Grace knelt beside him, placing a hand gently on his back. The warmth of his fur grounded her. For a moment, she didn't need answers. Only the quiet comfort of trusting her instincts, which told her that Charlie belonged here. The hospital staff, initially skeptical, began to accept Charlie's presence. At first, there were murmurs of discontent, whispers of a dog wandering into restricted areas. Some doctors voiced their concerns, but Grace became his quiet advocate, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, Charlie's presence was contributing to the baby's recovery. The medical staff, though hesitant, couldn't ignore the improvements they saw in the baby's condition. Slowly, they agreed to let Charlie stay, at least for now. As the days passed, an unexpected bond formed between Grace and Charlie. It wasn't just the comforting companionship between a nurse and a dog. It was something deeper. Each night, Grace found herself anticipating the quiet companionship of Charlie. She'd sit beside him, talking softly about her day, or sometimes just resting beside the baby's crib. For the first time in a long while, the weight of the world felt a little lighter. Charlie stayed close to the baby, always watching over her. And as Grace grew closer to the dog, she noticed shifts within herself. The grief she'd carried for so long, grief over her son's near-death experience, began to ease. The calm Charlie brought was contagious, filling Grace with a peace she hadn't felt in years. Their routine became a quiet ritual. Grace would check on the baby, making sure she was stable, then sit by Charlie's side. Every night, Charlie would look at her with those soft, knowing eyes. It was as if he understood her in a way no one else could. In those moments, the hospital transformed from a sterile, lifeless place into something more. A place where a dog could change everything. Without uttering a single word, Grace didn't need to explain it to anyone. She knew, deep in her heart, that Charlie was a lifeline, and she wasn't going to let him go. But as the days turned into weeks, Charlie's presence in the ICU raised questions. The hospital, after all, wasn't a place for strays. The administration couldn't ignore him much longer. Excuse me, but I need to interrupt the story here. Before we continue, could I kindly ask you to like this video and subscribe to our channel? It means the world to us. Thank you so much. Dr. Carter, the senior physician known for his rigid adherence to hospital protocol, was the first to officially challenge Charlie's place in the ICU. "This is a hospital, not a kennel," Dr. Carter said one afternoon, his voice firm as he confronted Grace in the break room. "I've heard the rumors, But we can't base medical decisions on superstition or sentimentality. Grace felt the weight of his words. She understood Dr. Carter's perspective. Hospitals ran on data, facts, and strict regulations. But Charlie wasn't just a dog. She couldn't explain it, but she knew deep down that his presence was linked to the baby's survival. Every time Charlie's by the crib, the baby stabilizes, Grace replied, her voice firm but pleading. Every time he leaves, the monitors show distress. You've seen the charts, Dr. Carter. The baby is improving, and Charlie is part of it. Dr. Carter's gaze hardened as he crossed his arms. We can't just ignore that, he said firmly. There's no evidence that a dog can heal a patient. We're removing him today. End of discussion. Grace's heart sank like a stone in water. She knew the hospital's hands were tied by the rules, but this was no longer about protocols. It was about life and death. It was about those invisible, unspoken connections that defied the textbooks and the science she had so long trusted. When Dr. Carter left, Grace stayed seated, her shoulders heavy with the weight of impending loss. Charlie, her last hope, was slipping from her grasp. The day Charlie was scheduled to be removed arrived like a storm on the horizon. Grace came in early, trying desperately to maintain a professional demeanor. But even as she moved through the familiar motions, her hands shook, betraying the anxiety that churned inside her. She hadn't told anyone yet about Charlie's fate. She couldn't. The baby's health had already begun to deteriorate again, and the tension in the ICU was suffocating. The once steady machines now beeped irregularly, sounding alarms that no one could ignore. Grace rushed to the crib, knowing this might be her last chance to see the baby before Charlie was taken away. But when she reached the crib, there he was, Charlie, lying still, his eyes fixed with a steady, unwavering focus on the child. It was as if he knew exactly what was about to happen. The thought of him being torn away broke Grace's heart. Then, without warning, the baby's heart monitor let out a long, shrill beep, a flatline. The room erupted in chaos as nurses rushed in, but everything froze in that moment. Grace stood rooted to the spot, unable to tear her eyes away from Charlie. The dog, calm as ever, rose from his spot beside the crib, nudging the baby's tiny hand with his nose. And in that moment, as if by some unseen force, the monitor flickered. The flat line was replaced by a slow, steady beat. The baby's heart was alive again. The room fell silent. Grace's breath caught in her throat as she watched, struggling to believe her own eyes. The medical staff exchanged stunned looks, their training unable to explain what they had just witnessed. Carter, who had come to oversee Charlie's removal, stood in the doorway, his expression frozen, the skepticism he had held so tightly shaken to its core. We can't keep him here based on this, Dr. Carter muttered, though his voice wavered, losing some of its usual certainty. Grace didn't need more proof. She felt the truth resonate deep within her. There was something bigger at play here, something no one could truly explain. Charlie wasn't just some visitor to the ICU. He was a vital part of the baby's fight for life. Removing him now could mean the end of that fight. The tension in the ICU was thick. Eyes darted between Charlie, the baby, and Dr. Carter, who remained firm, yet visibly conflicted. Security guards had arrived, and their presence made the stakes all the more real. Grace knelt beside Charlie, placing herself between him and the guards. Her hands trembled, but she forced them to steady as they rested on the dog's back. "Please don't do this," she begged, her voice trembling with emotion. "You've all seen the baby's progress. It's real. I don't care if there's no scientific explanation. Charlie is helping. You can't take him away." The room fell still as her words hung in the air. For a fleeting moment, Dr. Carter's face softened, his resolve faltering. But then, as quickly as the softness appeared, it was replaced by a wall of professionalism. His voice was firm again, resolute. "We have protocols, Grace," he said. "This isn't about belief or sentimentality. We need evidence, and there's none to support this." Tears welled in Grace's eyes, but her voice remained steady. "Then I'll take full responsibility. If anything goes wrong, it's on me. But I can't stand here and let that baby die when I know, in my heart, that Charlie is the reason she's still alive." Her words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with the weight of desperation and truth. The silence that followed felt endless. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Dr. Carter sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "One more night," he muttered, his voice resigned. "But this is your responsibility, Grace. If this goes south, it's on you." Relief flooded Grace's chest, and she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." The guards, seeing the shift, stepped back, and the ICU slowly returned to its familiar hum of activity. Though the tension remained thick in the air, Grace stayed by Charlie's side, her hand resting on his fur, as the baby's monitor began to beep steadily once again. That night, Grace stayed vigilant. She watched over the baby and Charlie, not daring to leave. The hours dragged on, weighed down by the events of the day, but she refused to falter. When the first rays of dawn began to light the ICU, something remarkable happened. The baby, who had been so frail and unresponsive, opened her eyes for the very first time. Grace gasped, her heart racing. She immediately called for the doctors, who rushed in, their faces a mix of disbelief and wonder as they observed the baby. Her tiny chest rose and fell with a strong, steady rhythm. Her vitals were stronger than they had been in weeks. Charlie, still lying peacefully beside the crib, lifted his head. His brown eyes met Grace's with an almost knowing look, an acknowledgement that his work had been completed. The doctors ran test after test, desperate to find a scientific explanation for the sudden improvement. But no matter how many tests they performed, no one could account for the baby's remarkable recovery. Carter stood in silence, his expression unreadable. Though he didn't speak, the skepticism that once defined him seemed to dissolve, replaced by a quiet glimmer of awe. A few days later, the baby was transferred out of the ICU, no longer in critical condition. Charlie, sensing the shift, rose from his spot by the crib. He nudged Grace's hand one last time, his gaze lingering on her before he padded silently out of the room. Grace watched him go, a mixture of gratitude and sadness filling her heart. She didn't fully understand what had happened, but one thing was clear. Charlie had been there when it mattered most, offering a kind of healing that went beyond medicine. As the hospital returned to its normal rhythm, Grace found herself reflecting on the extraordinary events of the past weeks. The connection between Charlie and the baby, though impossible to explain, had been undeniable. Sometimes she realized not everything needed to be understood. Some things, like miracles, were meant to be felt, not rationalized. Months later, standing by the window and gazing out over the bustling city streets, Grace thought of Charlie. She wondered where he might be now, what new purpose he was serving. A gentle smile crossed her face as she realized that miracles come in many forms, sometimes as profound as a child's recovery, and sometimes as simple as the quiet companionship of a dog. Did you enjoy the story? Do you believe that dogs have the power to save our lives? Let us know in the comments below. If you like this story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Dogs love us unconditionally, often more deeply than we love ourselves. Would you agree? Thank you so much for listening. See you in the next video. Have a great day.